Ancient Egypt is known for many artistic and technological achievements, constructing pyramids and temples, inventing a writing system, hieroglyphs, and advancements in many other fields. It has become clear that the Egyptians were well ahead of their time. What is not known is that the Egyptians worked for centuries with advanced technology and knowledge that has today been lost. We start our journey at the most famous library of classical antiquity. Over the centuries, the Library of Alexandria became one of the largest and most important libraries in the ancient world. The great philosophers of the age, scientists, mathematicians, poets from all civilizations came to study and exchange ideas. The most significant blow to history was the burning of the Alexandrian Library in the Egyptian campaign of Julius Caesar, during which 700,000 priceless scrolls were irretrievably lost. The Brunchion contained 400,000 books and the Serapeum 300,000. There was a complete catalogue of authors in 120 volumes, with a brief biography of each author. The Alexandrian Library was also a university and research institute. The university had faculties of medicine, mathematics, astronomy, literature, as well as other subjects, a chemical laboratory, astronomical observatory, anatomical theatre for operations and dissections, and a botanical and zoological garden were some of the facilities of this educational institution, where 14,000 pupils studied, laying the foundation of modern science. Alexandria declined rapidly after 415 CE, when the library was burnt down, with scientists, scholars, and thinkers of all disciplines leaving the once mighty city for safer places. With all these invaluable records destroyed, we are, in most cases, left to wonder how they constructed their masterpieces and how they acquired their technology. For now, it remains a complete mystery. Maybe unexpected discoveries can help fill the gaps left in ancient Egyptian history, perhaps even a vital clue left lying around a museum. Around 200 years ago, a great French Egyptologist, Champollion, visited the Turin Museum. In a storeroom, he came across a box with pieces of papyri. "What's in it?" he asked. "Useless rubbish, sir," answered the attendant. Champollion was not satisfied with this answer and began to put the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle. This rubbish turned out to be the only extant list of Egyptian dynasties with the names of the pharaohs and the dates of their reigns. It was a revelation. One can imagine how our views on antiquity will change if more chronicles of this type are found. Many Egyptian technology inventions have been wholly overlooked. Heron, an engineer of Alexandria, built an engine that embodied both the turbine and jet propulsion principles. The steam-powered device was known as the aeolipile, or the Heron engine. This invention was forgotten and never used in any meaningful way again until 1577, when the steam engine was reinvented by the astronomer, philosopher, and engineer Taqi al-Din. If it were not for the Alexandrian Library's repeated burnings, we might have had a story about a steam chariot in Egypt for all we know. At least we do know that Heron invented a speedometer registering the distance travelled by a vehicle. According to the alchemist Zosimus, the temple of Ptah at Memphis had furnaces, and this god was revered as the patron of the alchemists. The words chemistry and alchemy are derived from the name of Egypt, Chem. A very ancient tradition is perpetuated, even today, by using the words alchemy, chemistry, chemist, or chemical. Perhaps one of the biggest puzzles on the subject of ancient Egypt is the strange progress, or maybe we should say decline, in workmanship skill. For some reason, the workmanship level of jewellery and architecture in Egypt was higher in earlier periods. Rings, necklaces, earrings, diadems, and crowns of the 5th to 12th dynasties, displayed in Cairo Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of New York, are more perfectly made and more beautiful than later dynasties. Among the pyramids in Egypt, the first structures are superior in workmanship. The wave of progress markedly starts downward in Egypt about 1600 BCE. It is little known that the Suez Canal is not new. Its monumental construction was commenced in Pharaoh Necho's reign, nearly 2,600 years ago, and completed by the Persian conqueror Darius after the Egyptian ruler's death. Over many centuries, from about 2500 BCE to 1800 BCE, the sands of Arabia drifted into the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea until the canal became blocked. However, the Arabs had it dredged and opened for navigation in the 7th century. Lack of maintenance saw the channel blocked once more, and all communication between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea was cut off. In 1869, after a decade of construction, a French consortium opened the so-called New Canal. But make no mistake, this canal was not new. It was at least 2,600 years old. In 3100 BCE, King Menes of Egypt carried out a vast engineering scheme by diverting the River Nile's course to build his capital of Memphis. No nation had ever attempted such an enormous construction project. To have the city precisely where he wanted it, Menes had his workers build on the Nile's floodplain. To avoid the water overflow, they constructed a gigantic dam that diverted the annual floods that made the Nile Delta so fertile. Memphis played a key role from then onward, serving as ancient Egypt's capital in the Old Kingdom from 2686 BCE to 2134 BCE. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was the 135-meter-high Alexandrian lighthouse on the island of Pharos, built of white marble. The tower had a movable mirror, which at night projected its light so that it could be seen 400 kilometers away. Sunlight was used during the day and fire during the night. The lighthouse stood from 250 BCE until 1326, when an earthquake finally brought it down. These achievements of the people of antiquity were not surpassed in later centuries. In the Dark Ages, mankind experienced a fall in scientific progress, and it is only during the last 300 years that science began to pick up again. The famous Jericho heads, filled in with clay and shell, depict exquisite Egyptian-like faces. They have been dated to about 6500 BCE, roughly some 1500 years before Egyptian civilization. This discovery poses many questions. Were their mummified faces the outcome of a desire to immortalize man? If so, it provides evidence of the existence of religion in a very early period. Although we may never know their true purpose, the Jericho heads offer proof of the earliest arts ever found in the region. The discovery is interesting because abstract thinking does not come to humanity overnight. Are we missing an episode of history that could indicate civilization in the area is much older than we thought? During a 1930s archaeological expedition to the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, several mummies were excavated. Many of the jaws had bridges and artificial teeth that looked surprisingly like a modern dentist product. On some of the mummies, intricate gold work could clearly be seen around the teeth. Few scientists had expected to find evidence of amazingly detailed dentistry in ancient Egypt so many thousands of years ago. But it is a fact that an Egyptian named Hesri was the first named dental surgeon, astonishingly dated as far back as the 26th century BC. The Egyptians made use of an unknown mineral for anesthesia. The physicians of the land of the pyramids were aware of the functions of the heart and arteries and how to count the pulse. They were also aware of the relationship between the nervous system and movements of our limbs, and therefore understood the causes of paralysis. The Smith Papyrus contains 48 clinical cases. The ancient peoples of the Nile practiced hygiene, and generally speaking, their medicine was far superior to that practiced so much later in Europe during the Middle Ages. Yet another example of the withering of knowledge. Fun fact, Imhotep, the Zoser pyramid architect, is considered the first recorded physician in history some 6,500 years ago. In the Timaeus of Plato, written about 2,400 years ago, the philosopher gives a dialogue between a high priest of Egypt and Solon, Greece's lawmaker. A curious fact emerges from it. Egypt's sages were aware of asteroids in space and their occasional collisions with the Earth. To collate data of unusual happenings in nature throughout thousands of years and then evaluate them correctly can be done only by men of science. The sages of Egypt earned themselves such titles. The old Egyptian priest called Solon's attention to the Greek legend of the fall of Phaethon and explained to him what it really meant. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a deviation from their courses of the bodies moving around the earth and in the skies, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth recurring at long intervals of time. Can anything be more precise? The sage alludes to asteroids in space and their accidental crashes on our planet, causing explosions. The Academy of Sciences of France made a statement in writing 170 years ago which showed its disagreement with the views held by the wise men of the land of the Nile. In our enlightened age, there can still be people so superstitious as to believe stones fall from the sky. This is but another example of the periodic triumphs of ignorance even in an enlightened age. It might be inferred that a scientific legacy has existed for thousands of years, and despite natural calamities, which could often destroy whole civilizations, this ancient science was obviously passed on from one generation to the next. The first calendar in Egypt began with the earliest recorded date of 4241 BCE. Egyptian star charts occur as early as 3500 BCE, indicating a systematic study of astronomy. The Egyptians were aware that Mercury and Venus were closer to the Sun than Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. According to the writings of Simplicius in the 6th century CE, ancient Egyptians kept records of astronomical observations for an astonishing 630,000 years. The Egyptian priests told Herodotus in the 5th century BC that the sun had not always risen where it rose then. This certainly seemed to imply that they had kept records of equinoxes' precession, covering at least 26,000 years. Martianus Capella, 5th century, wrote that the wise Egyptian sages had secretly studied astronomy for over 40,000 years before sharing their knowledge with the world. The Greek historian Diogenes Laertius, 3rd century CE, claimed that the astronomical records of Egyptian priests began in 49219 BCE. He also referred to their documentation of 832 lunar cycles and 373 solar and eclipses, which would involve approximately 10,000 years. The first dynasty after the flood was traced by Sumerian priests to date 24,150 years before their time. George Syncellus, the Byzantine historian, said that the chroniclers of the pharaohs had recorded all events for 36,525 years. Ancient Egypt preserved rather than complicated beliefs concerning the cyclic creation and end of worlds. The little-known Edfu building texts talk of a remote golden age thousands of years earlier, when the gods themselves lived on an island. The text tells us that this vast island was utterly destroyed in a massive storm and flood caused by a great serpent. The majority of the inhabitants were gone, but the survivors settled in Egypt, where they became known as the builder gods. According to the Edfu texts, these survivors set out the foundations of all the future pyramids and temples of Egypt, and handed down the religion that would later spread throughout the land under the pharaoh's semi-divine rule. The benben was a sacred black metallic stone, originally located at Heliopolis, that symbolized the primeval mound. It was related to the Egyptian phoenix called the bebenet or Bennu bird. The benben might symbolize an iron meteorite, and the benbenet could have also suggested a comet. Both imply flight across the sky. The benben is believed to be the precursor and model for ancient Egypt's famous pyramids and obelisks. The gilded capstone placed at the peak of each obelisk or pyramid was known as a bennet. The original stone at Heliopolis was believed to have been the point at which the rays of the rising sun first fell, and it appears to date back to the first dynasty, if not earlier. Utterance 600 of the pyramid text says, "O Atum Corpora, you become high on the height. You had risen up as the benben stone in the mansion of the phoenix at On." It has been suggested that the Egyptian phoenix might symbolize a comet, and the benben stone could be an asteroid or megameteorite spawned by that comet. Herodotus placed the reign of Osiris at about 1500 BCE, from the information given to him by Egypt's priests. He made the remark that they were pretty sure about the preciseness of the date. The solar calendar of Egypt and the lunar calendar of Babylon coincided in the year 11542 BCE. The calendrical computations of India started with the year 11652 BCE. According to Plato, Egyptian priests gave the date of the sinking of Atlantis at 9850 BCE, while the books by the Zoroastrian set the beginning of time at 9600 BCE. That these dates are correct can of course be questioned, but we cannot escape the conclusion that the ancients were much closer to the truth than the clerics and scholars of 1.5 centuries ago, who thought the world was created in 4004 BCE, according to the chronological study of Bishop Ussher. Arabian sources contain curious tales about how the pyramids of Egypt were erected. The stones were wrapped in papyrus and then struck with a tuning rod by a priest. After the strike, they became completely weightless and moved through the air for about 50 meters. Then the priest repeated the procedure until the stone reached the pyramid and was put in place. This would explain the absence of chips on the edges of the stone blocks and the joints into which it is impossible to insert a sheet of paper. Even though the Khufu pyramid is no longer the tallest edifice in the world, it is still the biggest megalithic structure on Earth. When Napoleon overpowered Egypt, he visited the Great Pyramid. While there, he asked to be left alone in the king's chamber while his army waited outside. When he came out from the pyramid, all of the colors had drained from his face. Napoleon was ashen and looked utterly shaken by the experience. People inquired what had happened, but he steadfastly refused to talk about it and ordered his men never to ask again. On his deathbed, someone remembered the incident and said to him, "Do you recall the time you spent in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid and wouldn't speak of? What happened?" Even on his deathbed, Napoleon refused to answer the question. The pyramid texts contain a rather curious interpretation of the pyramid's purpose as a ramp to the sky, so that man may go up to the sky. There are 5,000-year-old images of Isis which portray the goddess with folded wings as a female Icarus. Man's aspiration to fly seems to be as old as the birds which he watched. This place has no air. Its depth is unfathomable, and it is as black as the blackest night. Is this the description of a dark, airless space by an astronaut? No, it is an extract from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is over 3,500 years old. The Book of Enoch also contains strange passages that indicate some sort of flight. That may be the reason why it was rejected by the bishops and rabbis as apocryphal, but their wisdom can be seriously questioned because the Book of Enoch was found incorporated in the Dead Sea Scrolls, together with the other books of the Bible. As the scrolls represent the oldest Bible in the world, going back to the 2nd century BCE, instead of the 20th century Masoretic text, the Book of Enoch should be accepted as an authoritative source. Here are extracts from this obscure scripture. "And they lifted me up into heaven," chapter 14, verse 8. "And it was hot as fire and cold as ice," chapter 14, verse 13. "I saw the places of the luminaries," chapter 17, verse 3. "And I came to a great darkness," chapter 17, verse 6. "I saw a deep abyss," chapter 17, verse 11. Does this not look like a graphic account of space? It is a dark abyss where objects get hot on the side illuminated by the sun and icy cold on the shaded side, and it is the abode of the sun, moon, planets, and the stars. As Enoch said, he described his emotional reaction at the sight of interstellar space as "fear covered me." To say the least, the words of the prophet are very intriguing, even if this interpretation is not altogether correct. But is there yet another hypothesis? It is a little-known fact that Alexandria's engineers designed over 100 different automatons over 2,000 years ago. The legendary Daedalus, the father of Icarus, constructed human-like figures that moved of their own accord. Plato says that his robots were so active that they had to be prevented from running away. By what energy were they operated? In the Timaeus, Plato recorded Egyptian priest Solon's words. There have been, and there will be again, many destructions of humanity. When civilization is destroyed due to natural calamities, then you have to begin all over again. Now, where should we look to find the traces of an antediluvian man? The lands of Egypt seem to be the first logical place to do a search for their records. Remember, according to Pomponius Mela in the 1st century, the Egyptians pride themselves on being the most ancient people in the world. As told by Plato, the story of Atlantis came to him from the priests of Netin Sais through Solon. "I am what has been, what is, and what shall be," uttered the goddess to the priests who kept records of history dating back thousands of years. Herodotus admitted that he could not reveal some of the mysteries he had learned from the Temple of Neith. Why was Herodotus not allowed to pass on these secrets? Could they have been revelations regarding the unknown history of humanity? From Ammianus Marcellinus, a 4th century Roman historian, to Ibn Abbad. Hokum, a 9th century Arab savant, numerous records speak about pre-deluge caches buried under or in Giza's pyramids. Who knows whether these stories might have a grain of truth? The cosmic ray probe of the pyramids by the Ain Shams University of Cairo, initiated by Dr. Luis Alvarez, provided compelling evidence in this field. The X-raying of the Khafre pyramid by cosmic rays in search of secret chambers disclosed a fantastic phenomenon. The tape recordings for any one particular day differ markedly from those for the subsequent day. As cosmic rays showered upon the pyramid uniformly from all directions, the detector in the chamber at the bottom should have shown a uniform pattern. In September 1968, the equipment was checked and apparently in good working order, as the pyramid's corners and sides could clearly be seen. However, the hundreds of hours of recordings made by the scientists in 1967 to 1969 disclosed a surprising fact. When they put through the IBM 130 computer at the Ain Shams University in Cairo, daily recordings had no common features. The man in charge of the installation, Dr. Amir Goed, remarked, "This is a mystery which is beyond explanation. This is scientifically impossible. There is some force inside the pyramid that defies the laws of science. What forces more potent than the cosmic rays did the pyramid builders possess? Had they left some sort of machine radiating this power under the Giza pyramids?" In 1967, an article for a Moscow newspaper was written, entitled, "Is there a generator under the Giza pyramids?" Some old books talk about pyramid power, unique energy within the pyramid's perfect geometrical structure. Supposedly, if you were to build a miniature replica of the pyramid, keeping the dimensions exactly in proportion and aligning the model with true north, certain exciting things happen. An example was given. Place any piece of fruit inside the replica and it will not decay for 1 month or more. For the record, I have not put this theory to the test. In regards to the Sphinx, a question was raised at a lecture. Is it really guarding the most ancient underground museum and library in the world? The Giza Plateau has been dubbed the underground galleries for very good reason. Additional seismographic evidence has also been accumulated that indicates several cavities lie buried underneath the Sphinx. Using ground-penetrating radar, Dr. Joseph Schor evidently also discovered a subterranean passageway under the 3 so-called Queen's Pyramids. The passage makes a turn and then goes under the Great Pyramid. Work continued near the Sphinx in 1987. In the Temples and Pyramids of Egypt, an update with Zahi Hawass, they mention that the Waseda University of Japan applied for a license to work on the Giza Plateau. Their request was approved and they started work on January the 13th. The last area the team from Japan investigated with ground-penetrating radar was the Sphinx Sanctuary. Just south of the Sphinx, they discovered a hollow cavity 3 meters under the surface and a groove on the Sphinx body that clearly extended below the Sphinx. They found another groove similar to the south of the Sphinx, which may indicate a tunnel or shaft underneath the Sphinx, connecting the south and north grooves. In front of the pores, another hollow space was found, 2 meters below the surface, extending underneath the Sphinx. This work was confirmed and used in the documentary The Mystery of the Sphinx. Some of this research was carried out by the Case Foundation, whose founder predicted a cavity would be discovered near the Sphinx and that it had been built in 10,500 BC by survivors of Atlantis. Also concealed beneath it, a hall of records would be discovered, a repository that would contain the entire collection of wisdom teachings from their lost civilization and the history of the human race. This front cavity of the Sphinx was rectangular in shape and measured 9 meters by 12 meters and was nearly 5 meters below the surface. Both teams working with ground-penetrating radar agreed that they detected a rubble-filled void in the area of the Sphinx's pores, as well as indication of potential cavities or tunnels extending under the Sphinx as seen along its flanks. Work was stopped shortly after, and right now we are only left to wonder what is in these tunnels and cavities and where do they lead. If it was remnants from an earlier advanced civilization, this would substantiate the theory that civilization is much older than we currently think. But a legacy from how long ago? Dr. Robert M. Schoch provided some hard scientific evidence when he examined the Sphinx. Evidence that gave some support to a much earlier date for the start of the Egyptian civilization. In his book Sacred Science, R.A. Schwaller wrote that the weathering patterns observed on Egypt's Great Sphinx were due to water, not wind and sand. John Anthony West was stunned when he read this assertion, as he, along with most everyone else, had always assumed that wind had caused the unusual scar-like erosion seen on the Sphinx. Not being a scientist himself, he needed a second opinion from a professional geologist. When explaining this situation to a friend at Boston University, it aroused the interest of a colleague, geologist Dr. Robert M. Schoch. Schoch was a paleontologist and stratigrapher, and thus an expert in the erosion and weathering of soft rock. As West explains, even though my Sphinx photographs looked to Schoch like typical water weathering, he was still profoundly skeptical, mainly because it seemed too obvious. Schoch found it hard to believe that in 200 years of studying, excavating and restoring the Giza Plateau, no one before Schwaller had noticed that the weathering on the Sphinx was water weathering, and no one before West had noticed that this was particular to the Sphinx and its associated structures. West's initial conviction was that, as an amateur, he must have overlooked significant evidence that would allow the accepted dating to stand. As it turns out, Schwaller was correct, and his unique observation did hold water. The only error West made was assuming that the water erosion was due to the Nile flooding in prehistoric times. According to Schoch, however, the weathering was precipitation-based, or in layman's terms, rainfall. The Great Sphinx, of course, is located in the hot Sahara Desert. The implications of this fact are pretty astonishing. It means that the Sphinx and the adjoining temple, which shows the same weathering, were built when it had rained for thousands of years. No other structures in the area offer this type of erosion. As Schoch explains, this line of thinking actually dates the original excavation of the Sphinx to somewhere closer to 7,000 to 5,000 BC. This date fits with the climactic history revealed in the rain weathering patterns. As earth-shaking a date as this has proved to be to conventional Egyptology, it is in fact only a conservative estimate that represents just a minimum age. The water weathering pattern on the Sphinx would make sense only if the structure was carved when the Egyptian weather was much wetter than it is today. This was the case at the end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. This could be a fantastic piece of corroborating scientific evidence that shows an alternate scenario for mankind's development instead of the currently accepted theories. Whether evidence of a lost civilization will ever be discovered at Giza, or by scanning the ocean floor at the bottom of the Atlantic, is still in the realm of speculation. But one thing is sure, the testimony of ancient writers, sacred books, and oral legends supports the reality of an advanced civilization that was not recorded in history. That civilization could have passed its scientific tradition to the caste of priests of Egypt, Mexico, Sumeria, India, and the philosophers of China and Greece, which explains how this knowledge continued throughout the ages. The idea that humanity's origin and civilization's appearance might be much older than accepted can clearly be drawn from some of the examples we have looked at. The historical data presented indeed demonstrates the presence of a forgotten ancient science in the past. But who were the teachers of the ancient Sumerians, Egyptians, and Greeks, from whom we ourselves received a store of knowledge? While at a convention in New York, the great physicist Niels Bohr once said to a scientist, "Everyone agrees that your theory is madness. The question which divides us is this: is it sufficiently crazy enough to be right?" The viewer can decide if the theory is crazy enough to be correct. So let's start at the beginning, the dawn of civilization. Strange demigods appeared on the earth. They enlightened, taught, and helped the primitive people. These demigods had a leader who civilized the Egyptians by giving them symbols to record sounds and ideas, charts of the stars, the harp to play upon, numbers to count with, names of herbs, and remedies to cure illness. Then the benefactor left the people of Egypt and ascended into the sky. His name was Thoth. Let us not forget these words translated from Dr. Doriel's writings. When Thoth, the Atlantean and master, helped raise the people of Kem to a high civilization, the time came for him to leave. Before he left, he erected the Great Pyramid over the entrance of the Great Halls of Amenti. In the pyramid, he left his records and appointed guards for his secrets from among the highest of his people. In later times, these guards' descendants became the wise pyramid priests, while Thoth was named the Recorder, god of wisdom, by those in the age that followed his departure. As time passed, the halls of Amenti became the halls of the gods, the Egyptian underworld, where the soul passed for judgment after death. During later times, Thoth's ego descended into men's bodies as described in the Emerald Tablets, a book of wisdom he wrote and left in the pyramid for those of a future age of light. His writings consisted of 12 tablets of emerald green, formed from a substance created through alchemical transmutation. Upon them are engraved symbols in the ancient Atlantean language, symbols that respond to the reader's attuned thought waves and release much more information and wisdom than the characters do when merely deciphered. The tablets are tied together with hoops of a golden-coloured alloy, suspended from a rod of the same material. Dr. Doriel translated this work and has published a translation of 10 of these 12 tablets. The last 2 are found in the interpretation of the Emerald Tablets. The following is an excerpt taken from this work. A long time ago, I, in my youth, lay 'neath the stars on long-buried Atlantis, musing of mysteries far above men. Then in my heart there grew a great desire to conquer the path that led to the stars. Year after year I yearned after wisdom, seeking unknown knowledge, following the way, until at last my soul, in great travail, broke from its bondage of earth-man. Free from the body, I flew through the night. Unfastened at last for me was the star space. Free was I from the shackles of night. Now to the end of space and time sought I wisdom, far beyond knowledge of mortal man. As this series continues, you shall notice strange coincidences among legends in countries separated by thousands of miles of oceans and deserts. How is it possible that in antiquity, when there was little to no connection between these civilizations, they all share very similar stories? Ancient India, a land of sages, saints and seers, and a land of scholars and scientists, is another region that saw more brilliant scientific knowledge in their earlier periods than later historical periods. Until the latter part of the 19th century, the West scholars thought that the Earth was a few thousand years old. The basic unit of Vedic cyclical time is the day of Brahma, which lasts 4.32 billion years. This figure is astonishingly close to today's astronomers, who calculate it to be about 4.543 billion years. In case you're wondering, Brahma means Earth's lifespan. Although later rulers often embarked on ambitious attempts at redesigning their capital cities as a showpiece for the nation's grandeur, the earlier medieval towns of Europe were usually built without any planning, almost by accident as they expanded. The irregular streets were typically narrow, with no drainage facilities. Yet the ancient cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in what is now Pakistan were as carefully planned as Tokyo or New York. Adequate water supply, drainage, and rubbish disposal were provided. They also had something considered a luxury in Europe and America until the end of the last century: private bathrooms and bathing pools. Archaeologists have confirmed the surprising fact that this brilliant town planning system was in operation at least 7,000 years ago. The people of this bygone era were eventually named Indus Valley Civilization, and excavations revealed they had spread a staggering 250,000 square miles, which included over 1,600 sites. The bricks with which these cities were built were strong, standard-sized bricks, baked in a wood-fired kiln. Because of their immense strength and reliability, they were used to construct the Karachi-Lahore railway line more than 100 years ago. It is also remarkable that today in Mohenjo-Daro, Bricks are made according to prototypes from the ancient ruins. This is another example of technology reaching its highest peak in India's distant past and then, for some reason, progressing no further. From then on, everything was done by replication of the old techniques. The elaborately made cave paintings of a hunter near Bombay, with their distinguishing features, are still admired by foreign tourists and Indian visitors alike. Much has been written about these exquisite works of art, but little has been said about the unexplained sophisticated technology used to make them. These murals are made from some sort of mysterious luminous paint. In one of the catacombs, which dates back to the 6th century BC, a picture portrays a group of women bearing gifts. When the light is switched on, the beautiful paintings are dull in color and lack depth. But when the guide switches off the lights, the figures on the wall gradually appear three-dimensional, as if they were made of marble. The ancient artist obtained this strange effect by the clever use of luminous paints, but the secret of the fantastic effect is no longer known. In Halebid, Mysore in southern India, several soapstone columns stand in a 12th century temple. There are polished strips on one of these coarse finished pillars. A fantastic effect occurs when looking into the mirror-like surface. You will see two simultaneous reflections, both in an upright and upside-down position. The unknown artisan must have closely studied optics to have created such a remarkable effect. In Ahmedabad, Gujarat, you will see a classic example of superb craftsmanship. There are two minarets, dated to the 11th century, in front of an arch with a laconic inscription, swinging towers. Secret unknown, the minarets are 23 meters in height, with a distance of 8 meters between them. When a group of visitors reaches the top of one tower, the guide climbs to the other's balcony, grips the railing, and begins to swing his minaret. Immediately, the other starts swaying to the amusement of the guests. The shaking minarets are one of only two of a kind in the world, and they show that the roots of Indian science are buried deep in time. The iron pillar housed in the same complex at Delhi's most famous monument, the Qutub Minar, dates back to AD 402. The pillar, weighing 6 tons and 7.5 meters in height, has continued to capture scientists' imagination since the early 1900s, because it has withstood India's tropical sunshine and heavy downpours during the monsoons for 15 centuries, but shows no sign of rust formation. This provides proof of superior metallurgical skills in ancient India. Aside from the mystery of the column's corrosion-resistant metal, the task of forging such an enormous pillar could not have been realized anywhere in the world until recent times. This type of iron production is possible today due to our advances in technology, but it is surprising to find such an accomplishment in AD 415. The pillar stands as a mute witness to the scientific tradition preserved worldwide by the people of antiquity. These people hold the answers to history and science puzzles, but unfortunately, time has forgotten them. The complex cultures that developed in what later became known as India had numerous skills that were greatly desired by the outside world. One example was the steel products used to make the famous Damascus swords. Metallurgists in India found a way to carbonize iron and thus turn it into steel. Discs 5 inches in diameter were heated with charcoal for a lengthy period. The iron and carbon formed ferric carbide, a much harder substance than pure iron. India's steelmakers did not want their secret discovered, so the steel was not identified as being from India. It was thus identified with Damascus. India had alchemy too. The Hindus were skilled in alchemy, and unlike their Chinese and European counterparts, they attributed positive polarity to mercury and negative to sulfur. They also thought that mercury and sulfur were primary elements. Alchemy in India was started in the search for an elixir for life, for imparting mortality, and later for the transmutation process for converting base metals into gold. Because the art of transmutation and the production of gold placed its makers in a dangerous position, the alchemists used carefully coded texts and enigmatic charts. This was particularly the case in mainland Europe, where the Inquisition was busy tracking down anyone practicing magical sciences from the East. ancient India possessed advanced knowledge in many areas. These days, the atomic theory is taught as part of modern physics, suggesting that this theory was proposed in the modern age. In reality, the idea of atoms is quite an old one. The atomic structure of matter is cited in the Brahmin treatises Nyaya and Vaisesika. The Yoga Vasishta states there are vast worlds within the hollows of each atom, multitudinous as the specks in a sunbeam. The Indian sage Uluka proposed a theory over 2,500 years ago that all material objects were made of paramanu, or seeds of matter. The Brahmin books contain a curious division of time. For instance, the Siddhanta Shiromani, a significant treatise of Indian mathematician Bhaskara II, subdivides the hour until it arrives at the final unit, timti, which is equivalent to 0.33750 of a second. How could it have been measured without precision instruments? Even Sanskrit scholars have no idea what required the ancient Hindus to measure time with this degree of accuracy. According to Pundit Kanya Yogi of Ambattur, the Brahmin's actual time measurement was sexagesimal, and he quoted the Brihath Sathaka and other Sanskrit sources. In ancient times, the day was separated into 60 kala, each equivalent to 24 minutes, subdivided into 60 vikala, each equal to 24 seconds. Then followed a further 60-fold subdivision of time into para, tatpara, vitatpara, ima, and finally the kashta is 1/300 millionth of a second. It is interesting to note 1/300 millionth of a second is very close to the lifespan of certain hyperons and mesons. With that in mind, we are left to ponder how the Brahmins use these fractions of a microsecond. Is this reckoning of time a memory from a highly technological civilization in the distant past? This fact supports the bold theory mentioned earlier that the science of nuclear physics is not new. The Vaharamira table, named after the Hindu astronomer and polymath, dated 550 CE, indicates the atom's size. The mathematical figure is pretty comparable to the actual size of the hydrogen atom. Bear in mind the atom is so tiny it would take roughly 50 million atoms of solid matter lined in a row to measure 1 centimeter. It appears fantastic that this ancient science recognized the atomic structure of matter and realized how small its ultimate particle is. Nothing like this had ever been attempted in the West until the 20th century. When Megasthenes, the ancient Greek historian, diplomat, and Indian ethnographer, talked about the subject of astronomy during his audience with King Chandragupta Maurya in 302 BCE, the latter declared, "Our Brahmins believe the Earth to be a sphere." Although this theory has been mentioned in some ancient texts, it was not entirely accepted until Galileo's time in the 17th century. The 2,500-year-old Surya Siddhanta, the oldest astronomy book known to humanity, contains entirely accurate measurements of the Earth's diameter and its distance from the Moon. The Rig Veda, the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text, includes a strange hymn concerning the 3 Earths, one within the other. The Earth has 3 thick zones, the inner core, outer core, and mantle. Isaac Newton said the same well over 2,000 years later. Only with scientific advancements and the perfection of instruments have we discovered the Rig Veda's veracity. Knowledge is power, and the priests of India, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mexico did not want to share it. The 6th chapter of the Surya Siddhanta states explicitly, this mystery of the gods is not to be imparted indiscriminately. This ancient law has been so strict in India that if a lowly man tried to listen to the Vedas being read, he would face punishment. As mentioned earlier, the Brahmins of India calculated the universe's duration, or the day of Brahma, to be 4.32 million years. The Druses, who live on the western edges of the Lebanon mountains, set the beginning of creation at 3.33 billion years. The present age of the Earth is considered to be about 4,600 billion years, whereas that of the crust is 3.3 billion years. There are strange parallels between these figures. What is really extraordinary is the time calculations of the ancient sages being estimated in millions of years. Cosmic chronology of this type was unknown until this century. The Vishnu Purana, a sacred book of India, contains a significant passage about a continent with two lands. The continent is Pushkar, and the lands are Varshas. The Vishnu Purana states that they lie at the foot of Meru in the North Pole. The continent faces Kashira, an ocean of milk, and the two lands are shaped like a bow. Mythological nonsense? The Vedas tell several interesting facts about ancient America. They call Mexico and Central America Patala. In Sanskrit, Patala means one of the 7 regions under the earth and the abode of serpents. According to the myths, an eagle named Garuda transported thousands of ancient mariners called snakes, nagas, there in its beak. The ancient Indian astronomers knew the continent of the Americas. The Brahmin text concerns the 2 land divisions, which are North and South America. It faces the North Pole, and Canada is only 1,000 miles away. The west side of North America does resemble a bow, as described by the Vishnu Purana. If this theory from one of India's sacred books is correct, a vast and baffling puzzle arises. From where could the Brahmins have got information about America and its exact shape from Greenland to Patagonia? A geographical survey indicates means of transport, possibly aerial and technical instruments. But 1,500 years before Columbus, India's civilization did not have ocean-going vessels, and so we have another baffling mystery in the history of science. A document written thousands of years ago is preserved in the Indian Prince's Library of Ujjain. It is known as Agastya Samhita. There are many astonishing passages in this document. They even contain instructions on how to construct an electric battery and how to use the battery to split water into its constituent gases, hydrogen and oxygen. Modern-day battery cells resemble Agastya's technique of generating electricity. Sage Agastya had used the following materials: 1 earthen pot, copper plate, copper sulfate, wet sawdust, zinc amalgam. Place the well-cleaned copper plate in an earthenware vessel. Cover it first with copper sulfate, then with moist sawdust. After that, put a mercury amalgamated zinc sheet on top of the sawdust to avoid polarization. The contact will create energy known by the twinned name of Mitra Varuna. Water will be separated by this current into pranavayu and udanavayu. If we utilize the power of 100 earthen pots on water, then water will change its form into life-giving oxygen and floating hydrogen. The Mitra Varuna is now called cathode-anode, and pranavayu and udanavayu are known to us as oxygen and hydrogen. Agastya's experiment was successfully shown in front of many scholars on August 7, 1990. Agastya's experiment was successfully shown in front of many scholars on August 7, 1990, during Swadeshi Vigyan Sanshodhan Sanstha's Nagpur meeting. According to this technique, when a cell was created, it produced 1.4 volts of electricity and short-circuit current as 23 mA. This again demonstrates the presence of electricity in the East long, long ago. Visitors to India have given many accounts of yogis sitting in a Buddha-like posture, floating in thin air or water. The notion is so outlandish to those outside India and the surrounding territory, they often refrained from reporting these phenomena due to fear of ridicule. Aryabhata, in his Surya Siddhanta, 2nd chapter, definitely speaks of gravitational field. According to the 2,000-year-old text, the Siddhas, adepts of high science, could become extremely heavy or as light as a feather. This ancient concept of gravity as a variable force rather than a constant is in itself very remarkable. In Surya Siddhant, Bhaskaracharya, also known as Bhaskara II, explains that Earth has gravitational force. The planets are mutually attracted, allowing them to hold themselves firmly in space. Objects fall to Earth due to a force of attraction by the Earth. Therefore, the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, planets, and constellations are held in orbit due to this attraction. This was also discussed in Prasnopanishad. It was not until 1687 that Newton rediscovered the law of gravity. Surya Siddhanta is partly based on Vedanga Jyotisha, which itself might reflect traditions going back to the Indian Iron Age, around 1000 BCE. Do demonstrations of anti-gravitation occur today, in this space age when it is needed most? Surprisingly enough, the answer is yes. It is believed that there is a miraculous giant granite boulder weighing about 55 kilograms at the Dargah of Qamar Ali Davesh at Shivapur village, which levitates and glides in the air by defying gravity. The famous and divine Dargah of Qamar Ali Davesh is visited by hundreds of devotees every day to witness the incredible phenomenon. Shivapur is 24 kilometers south of Pune, western India. This small, unknown village may hold the key to what scientists the world over are looking for. Often a bearded priest sits on the shrine steps or on the lawn, reading the Quran. When a reasonable number of people, Indians from Bombay or other cities, Mohammedan pilgrims, or even a rare tourist from abroad, assemble in front of the mosque, the priest closes his Quran and greets the visitors. Lifting this stone off the ground would typically require immense strength, but according to those who have seen the levitating stone, it's possible for a set number of men to lift it above their heads with only their index fingers, chanting Qamar Ali Davesh in loud ringing tones. Devotees have explained that the task can only be carried out by 11 people and just after shouting Qamar Ali's name in unison. Immediately after these instructions are carried out, incredible things have been known to happen. The boulder has, on occasion, sprung to life and risen into the air to a height of almost 2 meters. The granite block usually only stays in the air for a second and then crashes down with a bang. There is another 41-kilogram stone that requires the index fingers of 9 people to become weightless. Anti-gravity manifestation does not occur if any of the 3 factors, the index fingers of those taking part, their exact number, 11 or 9, and the correct chanting of the saint's name not met. This demonstration frequently takes place 6 times a day and is performed every day of the year. Apparently, the levitation effect relies on biocurrents and sound waves from the fingers. Perhaps science should study this unusual phenomenon to find out what causes it. Otherwise, interpretations of this demonstration could lead to a considerable lengthy and heated discussion. Numerous ancient texts speak of highly advanced aircraft and sophisticated techniques that 21st century people have yet to achieve. The Vimanas of ancient India are clearly the most intriguing. Many textbooks and epic poems are frequently cited. Written texts have come down to us through the ages. Most of them have never been translated into English. Flying machines are commonplace in most religions, and Hinduism is no exception. According to ancient Sanskrit texts discovered a few years ago by Westerners in a South Indian temple, Vimanas were open-topped flying devices, restricted to the Earth's atmosphere. In its true meaning, Vimana refers to flying machines. According to Dilip Kumar Kanjilal, PhD professor of Sanskrit literature at the West Bengal Education Service, in addition to the Samarangana Sutradhara, the Vaimanika Shastra, and the Yuktikalpataru of Bhoja, there are about 150 verses of the Yajurveda, Rig Veda, and the Atharva Veda, a lot of literary passages belonging to the Ramayana, the Bhagavata, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, and the Raghuvamsa, and some references of the Abhimaraka of Basa, the Dharma Abhijana Shakuntalam of Kalidasa, the Jatalas, the Avadhana literature, and of the Katha Sarit Sagara, and several literary works contained either references to aerial flight or to the mechanics of the aerial vehicles used in old ages in India. Reference to flying machines can be seen on 41 separate occasions in the Mahabharata of one of the world's oldest books. The air attack on Dwaraka deserves special mention. For example, there are references to King Salva's attack against Dwaraka, the city where God Krishna lived. In this epic war, Salva pilots a flying vehicle called Sabha, which has superpowers and can even make itself invisible. Krishna returns the attack with lightning that locates and destroys his enemies through sound. Another verse speaks of an aerial chariot with the sides of iron and clad with wings. How is it possible that bona fide ideas concerning aviation were present in an era regarded as the early days of civilization? The Vimana is described in the Ramayana as a circular multi-floored aircraft with windows and a domed roof. It emitted a melodious sound and flew with the speed of the wind. When we hear what this ancient aircraft could do, that is, stop and remain motionless in the sky, the only comparable modern-day machine we can relate to is a helicopter. The ancient myths give an account of how these machines soared above the clouds. Very high altitude does not seem to have been a problem either. One text mentions the ocean looks like a tiny pool of water when seen from the Vimana. The pilot was able to see the ocean coast and river deltas. The Vimanas, often described as mechanical birds in some later texts, were kept in a Vimana griya, a type of hangar. They were propelled by a yellowish-white liquid or quicksilver, the heavy metal element we more commonly know as mercury. The wealth of detail in these ancient tales might make you wonder if these flying chariots are evidence of a forgotten golden age of science. The Panchachand contains the entire story of an aircraft experiment. In ancient India, a Zeppelin-type airship was constructed that could take off, fly, or land. The prehistoric Zeppelin was operated by an elaborate control system that could safely maneuver upwards, downwards, and forwards. Many researchers would have us believe that these texts are flights of fancy in early India, but they could very well be a record of lost technology. It is worth mentioning a discovery that was made a few years back. Chinese researchers discovered ancient Sanskrit documents dating back thousands of years in Lhasa, Tibet. The ancient texts were sent for analysis to the University Chandigarh. The results were shocking. According to Dr. Ruth Rayner, the translated texts allegedly are blueprints for constructing interstellar spaceships. It is also worth noting that when Alexander the Great took his army into India over 2,000 years ago, his historians recorded an event where they were attacked by flying fiery shields. These strange objects sped through the air at his army and frightened the cavalry. These flying saucers did not use any weapons on Alexander's army, and Alexander conquered India. Ancient Sanskrit texts come in two categories: the mythical and religious literature known as the Daiva, and the factual records known as the Manusa. The Samara Sutmadara, a factual Indian text, was written by sage Bharadvaja, using much older texts as his source material, was discovered in a temple complex in India. The document contains 230 remarkable stanzas about the construction of flying machines. It dealt with the operational aspects of Vimanas and included instructions on precautions for long flights, the steering, protection of the airships from lightning and storms, and how the drive could be switched to solar energy from a free energy source, which sounds very much like antigravity. If this is an old version of science fiction, then it is probably the greatest ever written. The Hindu Surya Siddhamta speaks of scientists and philosophers who were able to circle the earth thousands of years ago, below the moon, but above the clouds. The Samaranagana Sutradhara, another book from India, contained an engaging text about the distant past, when men used Vimanas to meet beings who came down from the sky. Was this space traffic an era lost to the sands of time? That same text describes what could be described as something looking like the Antikythera mechanism. The Samaranga Sutradhara, compiled by King Bhoja, was dated to 1000 AD. In this document, the science of Vastu or architecture and engineering is described. It also contains a fascinating chapter on yantras, mystical diagrams, where all sorts of machines, including mechanical wooden robots operated by strings, nuts and bolts, and the Antikythera mechanism that nobody knew existed until recently. In his essay on the Rig Veda, Professor H.L. Hariyappa, a renowned scholar of Sanskrit and Indian philosophy, and one of the foremost exponents of Indian thought, values, and aesthetics, writes that in a distant age, gods came to the earth often, and that it was the privilege of some men to visit the immortals in the heavens. The Indian tradition is emphatic on the reality of communication with other worlds during the Golden Age. The Nagas, the mysterious gods who lived in India in ancient days, were blessed with miraculous powers and immense strength. Old Sanskrit texts say they lived in underground palaces lit by luminous precious stones somewhere in the Himalayas. The Nagas went on lengthy voyages in the heavens, sometimes lasting weeks. Even today, belief in the Nagas is so firmly ingrained in India's national consciousness that movies and plays use this theme to entertain Indian audiences. The god Garuda is thought by Brahmins to have a combination of eagle and human features. He is believed to travel through space, reaching the moon and even the pole star, which is 50 light-years away from us. It is believed that human life expectancy, technology, science, cognitive capacity, stature and/or height were significantly higher in ancient India than in the modern age. Then we also have the Jain texts, which record their history going back at least 80,000 years. The Tamil Sangam legends trace a lost land in the sea named Kumari Kandam, home to an advanced civilization. Similar records can be read in the Ramayana of a vast continent near modern-day Sri Lanka, called Lankapura, which was also sunk beneath the sea. Along the Gulf of Cambay coast, we find even more traces of sunken lands and forgotten civilizations. Dwarka, the legendary city of Lord Krishna, has been recently discovered, 40 feet under the waves of the Arabian Sea. Marine archaeologists have scanned the seabed in the area, and these scans show a vast urban settlement. Ancient artifacts, believed to be at least 9,000 years old, have also been recovered at the site. South of India, in Tamil Nadu, we also find the legacy of a highly developed civilization that created magnificent works of engineering, comparable, if not superior, to modern ones. It is at Tamil Nadu that we see one of the most remarkable discoveries of modern times. Between Pambam Island in India and Mannar Island in Sri Lanka lies an underwater structure that could be 1.7 million years old. These formations are the ruins of Rama's Bridge. This bridge was built by the god Hanuman and his army of ape men, as told in the ancient epic poem Ramayana. It is said that the ape men tied the rocks to the seabed, creating this immense structure. The bridge allowed Lord Rama to cross from India to Sri Lanka, where his wife Sita was being held captive by the demon king Ravana. Ibn Khordadbeh, in his 855 AD book Roads and Kingdoms, stated that the bridge was man-made, referring to it as Set Bandani, or Bridge of the Sea. Ancient Islamic legends also note that the bridge is man-made and was used by Adam, the first man created by God. These legends say it was used by Adam to traverse the route to a peak in Sri Lanka. Here, Adam repented for 1,000 years, during which he was standing on one foot. For locals, this tale explains the large footprint that can be seen on the peak. Recently, this narrow stretch of the sea has been the subject of controversy as developers try to obtain planning permission to build a bridge linking the island of Ceylon to India. Naturally, the project has been vehemently opposed by religious groups and environmentalists who see Rama's Bridge as a sacred area. Help in the bid to save the Rama's Bridge came from an unexpected source, NASA's satellite photos. These pictures reveal that the rock's alignment is not a natural formation. It could only have been created by human intervention. Moreover, we have additional facts that this bridge was passable by foot until the 15th century, when a hurricane engulfed the sea. More evidence of the bridge's very ancient origins come from the Geological Survey Institute's former director in India, Dr. S. Badrinarayanan. He stated in his report that the bridge being a natural formation would be impossible. He examined the area and noticed loose sand above the coral formations. Coral usually forms above rock formations and not above the sand. Radiocarbon dating of the structure dates the bridge to be an incredible 1.75 million years old, coinciding with the second of the 4 yugas, the Treta Yuga. Several studies have been undertaken to explain its geological age, but none of them can plausibly explain how this bridge could have formed naturally. Despite many scholars denying the evidence, this bridge does not appear to show us the last vestiges of an advanced ancient civilization that lived in India thousands of years ago. Who were these people? What happened to them? What advanced knowledge or machinery could have enabled them to create an engineering feat on this scale? One of the most ancient writings in Vedic literature comes from a god called Manu. Manu is the principal lawgiver, and his laws were chronicled in the extremely old Vedic text called the Laws of Manu. The laws explain the yugas, an ancient Vedic doctrine of the world ages. Manu indicates that over 24,000 years, possibly a reference to precession, we will see a series of 4 yugas or ages, each shorter and spiritually worse than the last. They further explain how of a time in the distant past, when human beings had direct contact with the divine intelligence emanating from Brahma, the seat of creative power and intelligence in the cosmos. This archaic golden age, the Satya Yuga, lasted about 4,800 years. After the golden age ended, humanity declined. Interestingly, every description of the golden age era relates to how the gods walked with men in a perfect and harmonious environment, balanced between the terrestrial and the celestial. Gods walked freely between heaven and the earth, and deities fought for justice and light. There is ambiguity regarding these deities' origin and names. However, it cannot be denied that they were forged to protect the earth and bring peace to India. We have scattered pieces of a puzzle, but slowly and surely we are piecing this puzzle together, and it is helping us form a picture of a lost episode in history. Of all the advanced ancient cultures around the world, one that captures the imagination like no other was located in South America. The megalithic ruins of these mysterious people can still be seen today in places like Pumapunku and Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, and at Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The most fascinating things about this civilization is its stonemasonry skills, but that is not the only thing we will look at here. There are many more mysteries to explore. Was there a golden age in Peru before the Spaniards came? The pre-Incan temples of Pachacamac, 31 kilometers south of Lima, were nailed with gold, found to weigh nearly a ton when removed. Was there a silver age in the Incas' land during the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro's invasion of Peru? His soldiers even dressed their horses in silver. Perhaps someone should have asked the question long ago. Why did Cortés expect to find gold in the Americas? Or why did Columbus expect to see gold? No civilization has ever built highways as well as the Peruvians did. The Inca road includes 25,000 miles of roads, tunnels, bridges, and causeways, with a straight line distance of 2,000 miles, some of which are still in use today. Chan, the Chimu Empire's capital in South America, flourished in the 11th to 15th centuries. Archaeologists discovered pyramidal temples, gardens, reservoirs, symmetrically arranged rooms, several walled citadels, and even more amazingly, pipes for hot and cold water. This technological achievement was non-existent in Europe during the same period. About 1290, Professor Julio Tello made a sensational find when studying Tiahuanaco-influenced artifacts near Cuzco. Professor Tello noticed llamas appeared with 5 toes on pottery fragments in the area, like the prehistoric llamas, extinct for 40 million years. At the present time, the llama has only 2 toes, but it did have 5 in an early evolutionary stage. This is not a mere conjecture, because skeletons of the prehistoric llama with 5 toes have been excavated in the same region. This discovery, which should have suggested to archaeologists and paleontologists the possible coexistence of man and prehistoric animals, passed largely unnoticed. The discovery of megalithic sculptures in Marcahuasi by Dr. Daniel Russo in 1952 has created an unsolved puzzle that has captivated authors' interest and imagination since they were found. Perched on a plateau high up in the Andes Mountains at an altitude of 4,000 meters stands an amphitheater of rock. Dr. Rutho found himself confronted by the enormous figures of Caucasian, African, and Semitic people who only came to the New World within the last 500 years. Dr. Rutho also discovered massive carvings of animals that had never lived in the Americas, such as elephants, lions, cows, and camels. Another exciting find was the extinct ancestor of the turtle, known only through its fossilized remains. There was also a horse sculpture, which posed a burning question. Around 9,000 years ago, the horse died out in the Americas, reappearing in the 16th century when Spanish conquistadors brought them back to the continent. There is one obvious answer to this mystery. The sculptures are from the past few hundred years. Yet geologists have analysed the white dioritic porphyry from which the heads were carved and conclude that the stone would have needed at least 10,000 years to take on the grey tint it now shows in the cuts. The mysterious sculptures appear to change their shape at different times of the day and year, depending on how they are illuminated. The sculptors of these monuments certainly knew about optics. To find a 10,000-year-old museum exhibiting such a high number of oddities was a challenge to the orthodox science. The central monument, the Monument of Humanity, has 14 faces. 2 faces are visible only by the moon's light, and 12 are visible by the sun's light. Rousseau's photos demonstrate the many varying faces of Makahuasi. He claims that even though his work lasted for a long 9 years, he has only covered a mere 10% of the figures. Other important monuments are the Feline, which can be seen only during the winter solstice week, and the Condor, whose form changes every 60 degrees. The Spanish conquistadors made a very curious discovery in a Peruvian mine during the 16th century, an 18-centimeter iron nail solidly encrusted in rock. Iron was unknown to the Inca until the conquest. With an estimated age thought to be in the tens of thousands of years, one wonders whose nail it was. Francisco de Toledo, the 5th Spanish viceroy of Peru, kept the mysterious nail in his study as a souvenir. The early inhabitants of South America did not just know about platinum, they used it too. Ornaments of platinum were found in Ecuador, made well before the Spanish conquest. Their techniques and ability in metalworking achievements are genuinely enigmatic. This poses a very thought-provoking question. How could Ecuadorians generate the temperature of over 1,770 degrees C required to melt it? Bear in mind, the melting of platinum in Europe was achieved only 2 centuries ago. Although scientific dentistry is a relatively recent innovation, Mayan remains dug up on the coast of Jaina in Campeche, Mexico, also show astonishing proficiency in dentistry. The fillings and crowns are still in place after many centuries. Drilling and setting were carried out by people who knew about the vital part of the tooth and were careful not to damage it. The pastes used are unknown, but they must have been good quality if the fillings are still intact. Cosmetic dentistry also developed thousands of years ago. The Maya shaped their teeth and inlaid them with jade, pyrite, and other gemstones. Tales of shining stones also come to us from South America. Many think this area of the Amazon basin has always been a pristine wilderness, but legends of a lost Amazonian city have lingered since the Spanish arrived on the continent. Barco Centenera, a diarist of the conquistadors, wrote about their discovery of Gran Moxo near Lake Sahares, located somewhere in the Paraguay River's springs. Early maps still marked this lake. On it was an island with the white stone palace of King El Gran Moxo. Centenera described his adventures in a book published in 1602. He paints a picture of this island city and says, between 2 high towers, a staircase led up to the entrance. On the summit of a 7-meter pillar was a great moon, which illuminated all the lake, dispelling darkness. There was a reservoir on the island from which metal water pipes irrigated the surrounding groves. He also saw an altar and ever-burning lanterns made of precious metals. Nearly 100 years ago, Colonel P.H. Fawcett was told by the natives of the Mato Grosso that mysterious cold lights had been seen by them in the lost cities of the jungle. Writing to the British author Lewis Spence, he said, "These people have a source of illumination that is strange to us. In fact, they are a remnant of a civilization that has gone and has retained old knowledge." Although the early conquistadors had heard stories from the local people about a fabulously wealthy Amazonian civilization with an unusual lighting source, the searches for the city invariably ended in disaster, as did Fawcett's. As David Gran describes in his book, British explorer Percy Harrison Fawcett claimed he had found evidence of an ancient civilization in the same area as Barco Centenera, which he called the City of Zed. Fawcett disappeared in the jungle in an expedition undertaken with his son and a companion in 1925. The discovery of lamps in ancient sepulchres burning with brilliance was no rarity. The Arabian, Roman, and Greek authors have written on this subject. Many Greek and Latin literature references testify to lucent bodies and mystic lamps found in tombs. 2 90-foot square sheets of mica were found wedged between horizontal courses of a Tiahuanaco pyramid in Bolivia during the early 20th century. One was broken up into smaller pieces and sold to the electrical industry. The other remains in situ. Mica is an insulator and was commonly used as a dielectric in capacitors up to recent times. The nearest source of mica to Tiahuanaco is hundreds of miles away in the Amazon basin. These historical reports dispel the notion that electricity is a new discovery. 12 miles south of Lake Titicaca is Tiahuanaco. In Tiahuanaco lie the enigmatic megalithic ruins of Tiahuanaco. Conventional historians assign Tiahuanaco's age at around 600 BC, believing that a pre-Inca civilization would construct these architectural marvels without the benefit of the wheel, modern tools, or even a written language. Arthur Posnansky, the explorer and engineer, was the first European to explore it and dated its buildings to approximately 15,000 BC. His disciple, English professor Hans Schindler Bellamy, believed Tiahuanaco to have reached back 12,000 years before the present era. The city is clearly a port city, complete with wharves and stone piers. The surrounding area is littered with millions of fossilized seaflora and seashells. Lake Titicaca, an inland sea 15 miles from the city and 12,400 feet above sea level, contains oceanic creatures, showing that the ocean had not only once reached this height, but ocean creatures have continued to live there. Known as the Baalbek of the New World, its architecture exhibits technological skill that exceeds modern building feats. We see something that has never been seen in any other ancient culture in the world at Tiwanaku. Colossal stone blocks joined with modular fittings and complex breech-locking levels. Many of the blocks were joined together like Lego and held in place by T-shaped metal clamps poured into place by a portable forge. A similar technique was employed in Egypt's Elephantine Island in the middle of the Nile. The port itself has many large carved stones, weighing between 100 and 200 tons. The largest is 440 tons. According to engineers, this is one of the most enormous stones ever moved and hoisted. Also of interesting note, geologists have discovered that this stone was quarried and transported an incredible 200 miles away. If that fact isn't astonishing enough for you, consider the fact that the route of this transport was through a mountain range that peaks at 15,000 feet. The fact that the rocks have been knocked off their foundations suggests massive upheaval here in the past. The docks themselves are large enough to hold hundreds of large ships comfortably. Excavations of the city suggest that it once held a population of 30 to 40,000 plus. The step pyramid in the city, Akapana Pyramid, is a step pyramid aligned with a perfect compass and had indoor plumbing. The temple nearby has a 10-ton gateway that was carved from a single rock. Just as fascinating are the toxodons and elephants carved into it. The toxodon was a large grazing creature similar to a hippo but with a longer neck. Both it and the South American elephant have been extinct from 11,000 to 12,000 BC. The elephant and toxodon images are commonly found in the city, ranging from pottery to textiles. The gigantic statues of deities found in the temple have similar themes to Egypt, India, and Greece. Two of them very strongly resemble Poseidon and Zeus. The Zeus has a straight nose, a beard, and lightning rays around his forehead. The Poseidon more closely resembles Oannes, the Mesopotamian deity, who is usually depicted with carved fish scales covering his legs. A layer of lime deposits covers all of the ruins, showing that it had once been underwater. Many ruins are also buried beneath a layer of silt sediments, indicating it was under the sea for a long time. Professor Posnansky instantly thought of the biblical flood. In 1945, carbon dating was not available, so he searched for ways to date it. He determined the date by finding out what the constellations would have been like thousands of years ago, and using the temple's compass. Finally, the professor came up with an approximate date of 15,000 BC. Other professors and experts in the field of archaeoastronomy have verified the accuracy of this dating. More recent tests using carbon dating indicate that the city was later re-inhabited around 200 AD, and that the figures already present in the city became to be revered as gods. Carbon dating for the older rocks has vastly different numbers, due to volcanic activity in the area during the 10,000 to 15,000 BC period. Examinations of the stone cuts at neighbouring Puma Punku offer evidence of sophisticated power tools having been used at the site. Some of the megaliths here measure more than 26 feet long, weighing more than 100 tons each. But what makes this ancient site stand out from many other ancient sites are its massive stones, precisely shaped corners, and laser-like cuts, which force us to question how ancient people created this breathtaking site. Some of these stones have perfectly parallel grooves cut into them that are only 1 centimetre deep. If the stones are carved from the hardest granite, how did they carve the grooves into these stones? What tools did they have at hand, and where did they come from? Could it be the case that they did not do this because it was hard? They did it because it was easy. The site is located at a lofty altitude of 12,800 feet. No trees grew in this area. No one can suggest trees were cut down and used as rollers, so the question is, how did they transport the stones? 22 kilometers inland from Puerto Supa along the desert coast, 120 kilometers north of the Peruvian capital Lima, archaeologists prove that significant discoveries can still be made even today. The ancient pyramids of Caral predate the Inca civilization by 4,000 years, but were flourishing a century before the pyramids of Giza. They have been identified as the most important archaeological discovery since the discovery of Machu Picchu in 1911. The ancient Nazca culture of South Peru is probably most renowned for the mysterious geoglyphs and lines inscribed on the high desert plain in the Nazca region of Peru, beginning over 2 millennia ago. These imposing lines, which reach hundreds of meters, have monumental images of birds, spiders, monkeys, fish, flowers, rosettes, and other shapes best seen from high above. It is, in fact, challenging, indeed in most cases quite impossible, to properly view these extensive lines and prodigious geoglyphs from ground level. Modern archaeologists only rediscovered these ancient geoglyphs after commercial pilots who had flown over them in the late 1930s and reported their existence. Numerous and quite diverse theories have been put forward to explain the reason for constructing these gigantic lines and geoglyphs. The Nazcans say that the giant pictures on the ground were made by another race before the Incas. Notably, the area covered by these beacons and signals is vast, covering hundreds of square kilometers. What phenomenon could have inspired the ancient Nazca Indians to create these tremendous works of art? And who were the markings intended for? Recently, scientists have discovered 143 previously unknown geoglyphs in Peru, using satellites and artificial intelligence to uncover ancient etchings. These glyphs are thought to date between 100 BC and 500 AD, and were created by removing the rocky black topsoil of darker stones to reveal the light-covered sand underneath. There are also enormous geoglyphs in Egypt, Malta, United States, Mississippi and California, Chile, Bolivia and other countries. But the Nazca geoglyphs, because of their numbers, characteristics, dimensions, form the most impressive and enigmatic archaeological group. Throughout humanity's history, we can find numerous examples of drawings that can only be viewed from the air. Most archaeologists believe that these various cultures were paying respect to their gods. But who were these gods? According to anthropology, when a primitive man becomes civilized, he creates an alphabet and literature. Full writing systems appear to have been invented at least 4 times in human history independently. First in Mesopotamia, where cuneiform was used between 3400 and 3300 BC, and shortly afterward in Egypt at around 3250 BC. By 1300 BC, we have evidence of Shang dynasty China using a fully operational writing system. Writing also appears in the culture of Mesoamerica, sometime between 900 and 600 BC. From then on, they advanced by leaps and bounds. The Inca represent an incredible human accomplishment, possibly the most organized advanced state of the ancient New World since Homo erectus began walking upright. They had highways, textiles, megalithic structures, knowledge of astronomy, but they are the only known advanced civilization that did not have any writing. In this respect, we can reflect on an extraordinary meeting that took place on November the 16th, 1532, between Pizarro and Atahualpa. They had one thing in common: neither could read. The Inca used quipu instead of written records, a complex network of colored knotted strings, some weighing up to 20 kilos and consisting of tens of thousands of knots. These allowed them to organize information, including their agreements, in a non-linear manner. Without any figures, they had a highly efficient method of accountancy. Without an alphabet, they had literature. These media were systematically destroyed by the Spanish. What might these records contain that would cause the Spanish to destroy them all? There was a superstitious fear of writing, which no other race in ancient history had ever shared. The origins of this custom are obscure. At the time of great strife, the state oracle pronounced that men had to do away with writing. That is how the quipu appeared. A mystery shrouds the connection between great strife and the alphabet. Why did the Incas and their ancestors not have any form of writing, as with all other progressive civilizations? If the quipu was a remnant of ancient calculators, then the explanation could be relatively simple. When the source technology disappeared, all that the Inca were left with was the equivalent of a stack of punch-hole cards, the quipu with no machines. This may seem far-fetched, but suppose all of the technology in existence vanished overnight, except for the clothes we are wearing. No houses or man-made structures of any kind exist, just the land as it was, say, 60,000 years ago. All of our technology is gone, but people would still retain knowledge and create alternative technology with their available resources. Could quipu be accounted for as an echo from the past? If there were a civilization with advanced technology that vanished in a cataclysm, it could account for the presence of this simplified calculator. There is other evidence pointing to the existence of advanced science in ancient South America. Etched deep into a Peruvian seaside hill is the massive Paracas candelabra geoglyph, more colloquially known as the candelabra of the Andes, or the miraculous sign of the three crosses. Its origin remains unknown. Erosion shows that it is at least 2,000 years old. This 185-meter-high engraving resembles the trident of Neptune with branches. The Spanish savant Beltrán García put forward a theory whereby the device, equipped with pulleys and cords, was a pre-Inca seismograph. By utilizing a pendulum, earthquakes could be recorded in South America and anywhere in the world. The colossal creation is placed precisely in a north-south direction, facing the Pacific. Some researchers are now asking that if the pre-Incan cultures were primitive with very little technology and tools, how could they have created complex megalithic buildings and walls like those found at Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo? Sacsayhuaman is located in Cuzco City, Peru. The stonework of Sacsayhuaman was created by highly skilled stonemasons, and we can only wonder who they really were. 3 gigantic 1,500 feet long and 54 feet wide walls were erected at an altitude of over 3,600 meters, 12,000 feet. The stones in these zigzag-patterned granite walls show clear signs of exposure to high temperatures, making the outside surface glossy and smooth. The builders had some advanced tech device that would melt stone, place, and allow them to cool and harden. The weight of some stone blocks is estimated to be from 25 to 100 tons. Yet, despite their great weight, the stones have been moved large distances. No mortar of any sort was used to join these stones. The structures are so compact that even a blade of grass cannot slide between the boulders, and that is why the stonework still remain a mystery. Though an incredibly advanced and sophisticated people, the Inca did not have the technology to shape hard stone with such accuracy, and even their oral traditions speak of those who came before. The evidence seems to support the idea that they were actually constructed by a far older culture. The most obvious proof is the apparent decline in workmanship in the newer constructions, compared with the more ancient craftsmanship. One has to wonder why this technology and the incredible methods used to build these megalithic ruins became lost in the immediate centuries afterward. The sheer weight and size of some of these stone blocks have prompted several researchers to wonder whether the ancient builders had mastered some form of levitation technology. The acoustic and magnetic levitation techniques currently under development by scientists can create a physical lifting force more potent than the force of gravity, and do not modify gravity or generate an anti-gravitational force. 100 years ago, no building contractor in the world could have replicated a building technique like this. With their 70-ton blocks in the pyramids, only the ancient Egyptians matched the craftsmanship of the South American stonemasons. Construction methods are one of the most frustrating areas of research regarding ancient technology. Most engineers have a theory on how these ancient artisans might have carved and erected massive precision-cut stones, but few engineers have put their ideas to the test. On the few occasions where the experts have tried to recreate these megalithic marvels, the results have been dismal. In the Cuzco earthquake of 1950, 90% of the city buildings were damaged, but not a single Inca-built wall was cracked. Wherever parts of houses were of Spanish origin, they either cracked or toppled. Dramatically, the quake proved the pre-Inca and Inca stonework was far superior. The Inca postal system was the fastest in the world until the middle of the 19th century. Their chasqui couriers, highly trained and physically fit, were in charge of carrying messages in relays and could deliver messages from Quito to Cuzco in just under 5 days. This is an incredible distance of 2,000 kilometers, and most of it at 3,000 meters of altitude. Not only were they used to transporting verbal messages, but they also helped the Sapa Inca's brother, keeping records of the people in the empire. It took 10 times longer to deliver a letter over a similar distance during Augustus's reign, despite the magnificent roads in ancient Rome. With the deterioration of Roman highways, letters began to travel even more slowly. Smoke signals were also used at strategic places to receive signals and communicate to other cities. The fire and smoke code system could cover 3,000 kilometers in 3 hours. At first glance, it might seem that Machu Picchu's site in the Andes Mountains has little in common with Stonehenge. On the contrary, as we shall now explain, both sites fulfilled precisely the same functional purpose. How do we know what Machu Picchu's true purpose was? Could it have been a star clock? There must have been an excellent reason to build the Machu Picchu so high in the Andes Mountains. Dubbed the city within the clouds, we can only imagine the labor that went into creating this masterpiece. The astronomical observations can be seen from this area totally unimpeded. Did they build unique rooms or structures for this purpose? Yes, the Temple of the Sun, the Intihuatana stone, and the Room of the Three Widows are 3 structures that the Incas constructed to observe celestial events. They were dedicated to their most important deity, the sun or Inti. The Intihuatana stone could be used to indicate significant stellar periods, including the date of the 2 equinoxes. These observations were used to predict changes of season and were used to plan the Incas' agricultural calendar. These events had to be carefully tracked for the population to survive. Who was the mastermind behind the intelligent choice of Machu Picchu as a stellar observatory? After a relatively recent discovery, some researchers suggest the Egyptian Thoth could have been involved. A clue to Thoth's involvement at Machu Picchu has indeed been found in Principal Temple, where archaeologists uncovered 56 vessels along with a mysterious layer of fine white sand. The number 56 signifies 2 lunar cycles similar to the 56 Aubrey holes at Stonehenge. Thus, it is highly likely that the vessels and sand were used to measure a lunar calendar, with which Thoth was closely associated. One ancient Egyptian text states that, following his dispute with Marduk, Ra, Thoth left Stonehenge for a distant land, referred to as Hau'u-Nebut. Could this destination have been Machu Picchu? The date at which Thoth left Stonehenge is likely to have coincided with the earliest ditch phase, which archaeologists have dated to circa 2965 BC. Amazingly, we find that the pre-Incan traditions recorded by the Spanish historian Montesinos place the beginning of the Andean calendar at an almost identical date of 2900 BC. As an advanced nation that constructed the longest roads in the world, megalithic masonry still standing today, and which had many other technical and scientific achievements, it can by no means be classed as a primitive communal society. The Incas stand out like a red light on the face of history, for no other advanced state has ever managed without private property as the basis of economic relationships. Nor has any other civilization existed without writing, but the Incas did. How did it originate, this mystery state in South America? The Inca rulers had strange tales about their solar pedigrees and their celestial ancestors landing upon this planet. Anthropological discoveries have created an incredible backdrop for the imperial Incas. An analysis of their blood groups has provided stunning evidence of their physiological uniqueness. Like the Egyptians, the Incas revered their rulers. After death, they were enthroned on golden chairs in the Temple of the Sun in Cuzco. 5 Inca mummies were preserved in the British Museum, later destroyed during a storeroom flood. In 1952, Lubran and Gilby made a stunning analysis with the following results. Mummy number 3 had groups C, E, and C, with the absence of D. An almost unparalleled case in the whole world, while mummy number 4 had substance D and C with the lack of C and E, an extremely rare combination among the American Indians. Scientists admit that the problem of their origin remains unsolved. To Inca monarchs married to secure an heir to the crown of the pure heaven-born culture, uncontaminated by any mixture of earthly mold, as Prescott put it. What was this heaven-born race which possessed such unusual sample combinations? The Inca enigma can be resolved in terms of a remnant from an unknown civilization. The Incans have an interesting legend. It states a tall man came from the land of dawn. He revealed to the South Americans the secrets of civilization and inspired them with high ethical ideals. When his mission was completed, like Oannes of Mesopotamian mythology, he vanished into the sea. He was known as Viracocha, the foam of the sea, yet another legend about a visitor from the stars whose ship could sail on the sea as well as space. By examining these curious archaeological discoveries, we can see that they hold a much greater significance than just the highly sophisticated stonemasonry technology. In fact, this discovery is so important that it could shed new light on an unknown, advanced, ancient civilization. There are stunning parallels to be found in many ancient sites around the world, this unknown civilization. In the dawn of time, civilization would begin and advance to greatness, only to vanish. Humanity would then regress back to prehistoric-like conditions and have to start all over again. Apart from stone ruins, hardly a trace of the former civilization would remain. Ancient writers on history have stated that society has been completely destroyed at least 5 times, either by water or fire. There are puzzles in the history of civilization that can be explained if we take the ancient stories of a sunken continent as a working theory. In the last glacial epoch, all of Canada, part of the United States, all of Holland, Belgium, Germany, Scandinavia, and parts of Eastern Europe were covered under an Arctic ice sheet. About 12,000 years ago, a sudden temperature rise occurred and the ice began to thaw. Sea levels rose 0.92 meters per century between 12,000 and 4,000 BCE. During this deglaciation, what was the cause of the end of the Ice Age? This documentary's leading theory is that civilization's source is way further back in time than is currently realized. The origin of society is constantly receding as new discoveries are made and science advances. Since actual science is fluid and modified by new evidence, many of the theories offered in this video may be found to be true in the end.